In late July, the CEOs of Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Apple were brought before the US government to talk about the ways big tech might just be ruining this country. And as to be expected, with the most brilliant tech minds of a generation went up against the leaders of the most powerful country in the world, everybody got it wrong. Well, howdy everybody, and welcome back over to the lighter side. Jared here. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Do it right now. Click anybody you can. Anybody you can. Right down there, right above there. I don't care, but just click a button. Click a button. Click a button. So, this video is going out to everybody who leaves cups of half-drunk water around their houses. You people need help. Okay, so as I said, big tech CEOs at the end of July virtually sat, before a House Judiciary Committee to discuss how corporations like Amazon, Google, and Apple are monopolizing or otherwise unethically controlling their respective markets. And I'm actually not going to comment on that. That's not what I meant when I said everybody got it wrong. But by all accounts, these companies do need reined in, at least in part. And I think the committee asked extremely thoughtful, pointed questions at the four CEOs, which in all honesty is probably in response to how badly House committees have looked in the past when trying to talk about technology. Mr. Zuckerberg, we understand what you're saying, sir, and that is all well and good. But what we really need to know the answer to is, where do the gigawatts come into play? Mr. Zuckerberg, the gigawatts. Mr. Zuckerberg. But what I mean in this case is that there's something much more threatening about big tech that we need to be aware of. As we all know, social media causes change more rapidly than we can adapt to, but what matters most is not the effect it's having on the economy. It's the effect it's having at the individual level. Social media is a greater threat to our well-being than it is to our economy. And absolutely not. I do not want the US or any other government body, for that matter, to hold constant committee meetings on the psychological well-being of each of its citizens. That sounds like the beginning of a horribly written young adult conspiracy novel. But what I do want is for us to take the psychological effects of social media seriously. But we have to flag two things real quick. First, everyone likes to play armchair expert on how social media is rotting all of our heads. But if we don't look at well-researched theories, then we're just grasping at straws. Second, everyone thinks the great debate with social media is just a moot point. They like to say there are benefits for connectivity, but it's also toxic, yada yada. But I think we can do much better than some sort of reductionist middle ground cliche phrase. So what we're going to do is look at the 5 truths about the negative effects of social media from a researched psychological standpoint. And the first one comes at us courtesy of Jonathan Haidt, a psychologist and researcher that we have talked about before on this show. So his research tells us that people born on or after 1995 are at an increased risk of depression and anxiety. And we are getting mountains of information that are telling us that the way in which young people engage with social media is causally linked to depressive and anxious tendencies. Now, this is where we have to pump the brakes. This is where that desire to play armchair expert kicks in. Everyone has a theory on why this is happening. Don't use it, okay? Not until we know for a fact should we just play it fast and loose with theories that we don't understand. What we do need to be aware of and simply be aware of is that depression and anxiety are at an increased rate in young adults now, and that it seems to be causally linked to social media. Second, the division in our country has absolutely skyrocketed. And people like to say, you don't think we've been this divided before, Jared? We once went to war. What do you think about that? And I know, that sounds smart. I used to say that myself, but the data actually says differently. As we've quoted before on this show, the country really is more divided than any other era when you test for how much each party respects and fears the other major party. In 1980, and by all accounts every year before 1980, only about 10% or fewer of Republicans would have said that they felt threatened by the Democratic Party. Now that number is almost 60%. And don't get too high on that high horse, because the number is almost identical the other way around. This type of stark, fear-based division can only be courtesy of how much we consume political views. So this is thanks to news agencies, the 24-hour television networks, and yes, social media. Third, when we don't see who we're arguing against, we go for the knockout punches. A lot of research has been done on how circumstances of a situation affect our behavior. In many ways, that literally is the bedrock of sociology and psychology. But one such study is really alarming. Military researchers in the early to midpoint of the 20th century were curious about soldiers fighting in war and how hard it was to inflict pain and death on your opposition. What the research found was exactly what they thought they'd find. People didn't have grand moral rules they always stuck to. Instead, people were willing to inflict more harm the less they were exposed to their enemies. Basically, it just means that it's much easier to fire at a soldier from a plane than it is to fire live rounds on the ground. But this same premise has been expanded on and used to explain mundane interactions in our society as well. It's much easier to go for it and say unpopular, rude, and even vicious things when you aren't sitting in front of someone's face. Social media has created a screen that nudges us to say what we otherwise wouldn't. And that's not necessarily a good thing, by the way. A lot of people would say, well, that takes the emotion out of it. We're just logical, reasoned beings. I'm willing to stand up for myself. But we have to remember, part of who we are is how we interact and engage with the people we care about. One of the most beautiful moments, or one of the most beautiful moments in life, is when you meet somebody who kind of disagrees with you, and you get to have that conversation face to face. That is something that's totally lost when we try to do it online. Fourth, another extremely simple one is just that social media makes activities that used to be active passive. Connecting with family, discovering new recipes, or finding a recipe for dinner that night, or just household project ideas. All these things used to be extremely active. You had to engage with the process. Now, passively, these ideas are thrown in front of our faces. And this might be fine, I guess, when you're looking for a new recipe for Spanish rice, but it becomes incredibly dangerous when we start to engage and consume politics 100% passively. And last, but maybe the scariest, are the bubbles we stay in. You might have heard a few years ago about the frightening statistics on how few people of color the average American was friends with or followed on social media. But it's not just the racial divide, it's the cultural and political divide as well. We are group mammals. When we find people who agree with us, we stick with them, which is not necessarily a bad thing, as we've said before, but when you couple it with fake news and you couple it with the ability to find gratification in your peers instantly, this sort of group mentality can be devastating to reaching across the aisle. So those are the major problems. What can we do about it? Well, first, if you're one of those lucky, crazy people who can just quit things cold turkey, go on diets immediately, more power to you. You're better than the rest of us, all right? Regulate yourself on social media and have a great day. But if you are a warm-blooded mammal, normal person like the rest of us, these are some tips that you can try. The first thing you can do is play devil's advocate within your own group. You're in a safe space. So instead of going out and waging war, ganging up with other people and trying to make someone's point seem lesser, maybe try more often to question your own beliefs, the beliefs of people with whom you often agree. And maybe at first you're not doing that to change anyone's belief, but maybe to hone your own beliefs. We get away with too much on social media as far as suppressing logic goes. We often let people with whom we agree with get away with their points. The second thing, get away with their points that we disagree with, sorry. But the second thing is we can treat our phones like social media. We have these $1,000 6-inch computers sitting in our pockets. We don't always need Facebook or Snapchat or Twitter or Instagram to save the day. When you think of something funny, occasionally just text it to friends who have the same sense of humor. If you really care about seeing and connecting with your family, well, for goodness sakes, talk to them directly. And I don't mean you always have to call them or FaceTime with them, but reach out to them individually. You don't deserve any credit for accidentally seeing that your niece and her husband are having another baby. It might make your community smaller at times, but it might make it that much more meaningful and that much more rewarding. The third thing you can do is when you do disagree online, try to ask questions first instead of typing out long, angry responses that nobody is going to read anyway. Questions are the best way to start a healthy conversation because first, they de-escalate, and second, they show your willingness to learn. And honestly, I hate to be this Machiavellian about it, but if you're a good arguer, you know that that's the right strategy anyway. Let the person you're discussing with tear holes in their own point. Fourth, be open-minded about having to pay for these types of applications in the future. It may very well be that down the line, social media apps are paid subscriptions or one-time purchases. And that might sound wild right now. We are so used to this free type of economy, but let's think logically here. Facebook is not a billion-dollar company because of Farmville. I mean, that is 95% of it, but no, seriously, if you enjoy these apps, you should be willing to pay for them. There is a growing movement that says the only way we can take our lives back from big tech companies is to make them match or make them fit into our economy and the way the economy has looked for over 200 years. You build something, you sell something, you compete with others, and maybe people buy your thing. This could solve so much of the data mining and advertising concerns our world has. Fifth, last but certainly not least, you can focus your attention on people. The truth is, if you're like us, you want people to start talking more openly about basically, everything. But that really has a better chance of happening with the people you live your life around, or the people on social media with whom you have a long-standing rapport. We do this show because we're trying to do even more, but we're not under the false delusion that this is more effective than talking to someone face to face or reaching out to people on an individual basis with whom you already have great relationships. Yes, every now and again, a friend might be won online, but more often than not, they're lost or never found at all. Social media is not kinda good, kinda bad. It's a useful tool, fine, but it is without question negatively affecting people's health and changing the way our country's citizens view and communicate with one another. So there's only one question left. That glass of water you left on your bedside table, is it half empty or half full? Thanks for watching. Remember, we have no interest in changing what you think, just how we all think. Have a great day, everybody.